everybody. Thank you so much, Fermin, and thank you to my colleagues, Rachel and Matt, for their beautiful talks. I do think they cheated, though, don't you think? Like, a little bit? They did show their work. I am such a good girl. I took it totally literally, and I'm not showing any work. So I think if I was the kind of person that could easily talk about myself for half an hour, I might not have been an architect. We are an introverted lot, by and large, and our work is the face we put forward to our world. So the conditions of this talk are tough. And the last few years have been tough too, I think. Ongoing climate change inaction, COVID, the failure of the voice to Parliament, the war in Ukraine and now in the Middle East. Add Trump and inflation, and it all just seems like such a mess. At a personal level, I've had cancer in that time and been through nearly 2 years of pretty brutal treatment, which explains why my hair now looks like a bran muffin. So where do we put our hope? Architecture is by its nature an optimistic profession. It is a register of hope. It relies on a belief in the future. It dreams of change for the better. It aims for a kind of permanence, the longevity of a contribution to a continuous project. It wants to see the best in human nature. There are some people who are just architects all the way through. Maybe Matt just is an architect all the way through. They're singular, brilliant, focused, purposeful. This is not the kind of architect that I am. I am more of a hybrid. I love so many things that it took me a long time to settle to being an architect. I love reading and writing, drawing, gardens, yoga, music, dancing, film, painting, sculpture. I truly think that all of this gets drawn into the way that I think about architecture, that design has become the vehicle for the distillation of these disparate interests. Books and film tell you about character, about people, and their relation to space and memory. They make sense of who we are. Gardening is a kind of antidote to architecture, a reprieve for softness and movement. Yoga is intelligence in action and structure, and a place to think or not to think. Painting and drawing slow you down to really see. Works of art and sculpture are analogous to architecture and often inspirations in our work. I love this sculpture because although all of the branches blossom, only one has a nest attached. This is architecture for me. I'm glued on now. Many years ago, I did one of those rapid-fire questions and they asked me which book changed my life, and I said my passport. So this is the corner of my home. The painting is from an artist, Linda Siddick, from the Northern Territory. The chair is by an Australian designer, Grant Featherstone, given to me in lieu of fees on an early job. It's a great chair. The wall lamp is from an op shop in Stockholm. The carpet is also Swedish design. The beaded figures on the windowsill are from South Africa. The one on the right, if you can see that, made by this Ndebele woman. So I am a hybrid not only of interests but also of countries. I'm going to tell you a version of myself through 3 countries: South Africa, Australia, and Sweden. This is not a story of blocks of time in sequence, but rather overlapping and interrelated. I was born in South Africa from a long line of lawyers and teachers. My father was a very brilliant and impractical man. He often said he didn't have a creative bone in his body and was at two with nature. He was deeply eccentric, with a great love of music and almost no visual or spatial sense. He actually could not open a can of tuna. He was like a head with a body more or less attached. This is my mother. She's actually here tonight, so I better be careful. My mother is a woman of words and pictures, a teacher, an antiquarian book dealer, and a librarian. She could do 12 things at once, including house repairs, and make it look easy. She had a spitfire temper and enormous energy. I loved going to her bookshop in downtown Johannesburg. It was full of books and maps and ancient armchairs and cupboards full of stationery. One of my earliest memories of building was brazenly walking onto building sites with her. No signs and fences prevented us, and anyway, my mother made her own rules. We would walk around the foundations, trying to work out what went where and which rooms were which, like an enormous spatial puzzle or a dollhouse. Growing up in South Africa, in the apartheid era, there was no civic life to speak of. Life happened at home. Our own homes, our friends and our family. Outside was for playing, inside was for reading and drawing. These are you can see why my dad was kind of nuts. He had 4 daughters. So we had no screens, like no TV at all. And my memory of life as a child always seemed to happen outside. In the garden that my sisters and I grew up in, we would play elaborate games that took hours to set up. So princesses and slaves, forgive me, was a favourite. As a middle child, I had more than my fair share of turns being the slave, which set me up beautifully for being an architect. I've made a garden of some description in every house I've lived in, including growing a wall of nasturtiums for privacy inside a flat in Bondi. My first world was small and large. When I went back to South Africa as a young student after my first degree in architecture at Sydney University, my first day was spent with this young girl. And I remember so clearly recognising her small world of ants and hot slate pavers, soft, solid buildings with thatch roofs. I understood in that moment why I never felt truly Australian, because my first world had been defined somewhere else. Buildings in South Africa are so handmade, so imperfect, and so graceful. I love these 2 pictures, how involuntarily somehow the children are mirroring the gesture of the houses. I worked for Myra Fazler-Kamstra, who was the daughter of John Fazler, one of the early adopters of the international style in South Africa. My first task was to sort her and her partner's slide collection. So Myra had taken the overall shots and Marcus the details, or it might have been the other way around. I found this infinitely depressing. When did they see each other? I was only 20 and romantic. Myra taught me a lot about practice that I only remembered later as it became relevant. The boom or bust cycle. Either you have too much work, so no time, or no work, so no money to use in all your unwanted spare time. That the 50s for women was the most demanding time, with ageing parents, growing kids, and our own precarious health. Oh, and maybe don't marry another architect. She had an original Le Corbusier print on the wall, and she showed me this letter, which was written from Corb to the South African modernists. And I just pulled this out, which I think so much of it still feels like such good advice. Have done with formulas, tricks of the trade, and slickness, and banish stupidity. Corb's later work was picked up very much by architects working in South Africa, such as Gawie Fagan and Roelof Eyten-Bogaert, who have done extraordinary work. After that, I worked for a small office for Julian Michaels and Sarah Calburn. It was cowboy territory. I was in my 4th year and running jobs on site, producing drawings in the nick of time, and generally flying by the seat of my pants. I made some scary errors, but was saved, I think, now by the slow pace of construction and the handmade quality of the work. I have no memory of contractual fights, variations, or delays, just a kind of strange immediacy between drawing and building. That's me on the Opera House steps. This picture was taken in 1975. My family had come to visit Sydney, ostensibly to prepare us for immigration. I remember the Opera House made a huge impression on me. A building like a very still beast, a giant open structure that we were free to touch and climb on. It was profoundly and immediately mine in a tactile and intuitive way. So this is 1975. I had no idea at the time that the building hadn't always been there, and yet it had only been complete for 2 years. And then, as an architecture student, we studied how the geometries of the shells, the podium, the tiling were made. It took time just to understand how Utzon resolved the repeating geometries of the beams and precast tiling panels, how they fan and slot into each other. Time to just understand, let alone invent. How this building works as simply as a platform and a roof, as both nature and building. How useful it is as a stage set of grand public stairs. How it constantly reminds us of the beauty of sun, sky, and water. It is a pitch-perfect soloist, soaring above the composition of the city and yet part of it. The Opera House still stands as the most perfect marriage of sight, expression, and invention. It truly is the city's house, inside and out. This is this beautiful picture which we've just found of Anthony Browse, which it's funny you find it's unusual to find a picture that allows you to see the Opera House again in a new way. I think this is just an incredibly beautiful photo. So studying architecture at Sydney University in the late 80s put me in a clear lineage from Utzon to Richard de Plastria to Sue Rice and Shelley Indick. We were taught to draw analytically from nature. We cut vegetables and fish and drew them in section. We learned to diagram, to penetrate the logic of an idea. We were not fashionable. In fact, the opposite. There was a kind of ragged vocational quality to our devotion, our pursuit of truthfulness, integrity. We wore ancient, overwashed T-shirts, smoked like chimneys, and hardly slept. I think that it helped that the entry mark to architecture wasn't that high, and our education was almost free. We studied with people from all over, with wide-ranging interests, from cars to art to music. So, also South African, Neil Durbach was my tutor in my second degree after my return from working in Johannesburg. He was an extraordinary teacher, searing honesty combined with scary humour, a precedent library in his head. Neil is a stranger to tact. Neil's commitment to carved rather than assembled architecture made him an anomaly at this time. He was un-Australian at the time of Glenn Murcutt and the Sydney School generally, and I was totally drawn to his way of seeing and thinking. He demonstrated that you could love many architectures from many eras if you understood their deep logic, not just their dressing. We share a love of Corb. Neil says that Corb is a door that is always opening. We share a love of gardens and a sense of humour, which has helped a lot over 30 years of shared practice. So this became the underpinning of our practice together, and then later with David Jaggers, stoic, utterly honourable, endlessly able and talented. David became the third point of the tripod and a huge contributor to the stability and longevity of our partnership. We run a small practice, always around 12 people. We have a fantastic team. Our office is not designed, but if I had to describe the way we work, it is specifically non-executive in structure. The three of us slide through every task on a job, including designing, managing, drawing, and documenting. So we are both on the upper deck guiding and down below rowing. I do believe that this is our secret power if we have one. The work is always ours, not delegated or overseen. We like to say that we put the fun back into dysfunctional and that we take turns at being reasonable. We genuinely believe in the possibility of invention, but based in deep knowledge and thinking from first principles, not new for its own sake. I hesitate to use the word innovation, debased as it is by overuse, and also as one of our clients put it, we don't mind innovation as long as it's been done before. So our office has had 3 homes, Kent Street, York Street, there Nick and Rach, and now Potts Point. At one time or another, we have shared these with architects Nicholas Murcutt, David Ostinger, Rachel Neeson, Joe Gretsch, Stephen Neal, David Newstein, Grace Mortlock, and landscape architects Barbara Schaffer and Sue Barnsley. The studio environment was so much a part of our growing up as architects, so many crazy moments, so much shared creation, joy, and commiseration. Many people have worked in our office too, too numerous to mention here, that have gone on to do their own thing with great success. So funny how these things happened, but I ended up married to a Swede, not an architect. Johan is on the left, that's my brother-in-law Christian, who's also here tonight, the whole family's here. Johan is a documentary maker with a broad mind and a vast catalogue of interests. This is from Johan's first summer with me at Glen Murcutt's beautiful farm and his introduction to all things Australian and architecture. Johan is known for his charming slippages in English. My all-time favourite is, "It is better to go out with a bang than a wimp." We have 3 kids together, all hybrids of South African, Australian, Swedish, Russian, Jewish, Scottish heritage. This is taken when the first iPhone came out in 2008. Our youngest is now about to turn 18. And something does change as they become adults. As Peter Gabriel put it so beautifully, the children take the centre, mom and pop the frame. Sweden and Scandinavia more broadly is an incredibly grown-up place. I'm so deeply impressed by the generosity of its cities, its ease with the seasons, its understanding of citizenship and cycles of celebration, its value of all things design, its understanding of interiors that have a richness and complexity to suit so many indoor hours. So I became obsessed with Asplund and Leverance's Woodland Cemetery and have seen this incredible place in almost all seasons. It never fails to astound me, and it continues to be one of the most perfect projects of landscape and architecture and art. It is an ever-changing narrative of forest and clearing, garden and building, life and death. This is my amazing mother-in-law Gunilla at 19, tramping through the snow. I was elated to be there again. In snow, the Woodland Cemetery has a softness, both visual and acoustic, that is profoundly moving, a deep silence. And Gunilla leaned close to me and said very quietly, "Please, do not look so happy at the cemetery. For some people, it is a sad occasion." But truly, this is a place of lasting magnificence. Architecture that is always present, always eloquent. And I'm paraphrasing John Berger here when he talks about painting, but it is true of architecture too, that a painting has the effect of closing the distance in time between the painting of a picture and one's own act of looking at it. In this special sense, all paintings are contemporary, hence the immediacy of their testimony. This partly explains the urgency that is still palpable in the great works of architecture. I think we travel thinking and seeing in this brilliance of an eternal present, seeing and re-seeing the great works. We can trust in this eloquence, and I hope this is where we can put our hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, with the start of your talk, you mentioned something that I didn't know, that hard time that you have, and also you mentioned that some other things that are happening in the world, like inactivity regarding sustainability, and we should do something in that way. And also political movements. Have you mentioned some politicians? I wonder if you are kind of optimistic about the future.
You know, I have to say yes, because what?
But what do you really feel? Serious no? You can say no too.
Yeah, I think it's a shit show. But you know, I guess you have to solve the problems that you can. You can't, I can't fix Trump. Somebody has to, but it can't be me, so.
Sure.
Sure.
I kind of forgot what should I say to that. Actually, there is something that you mentioned in one of the talks that I found it very interesting about architecture that is seen by many people, like in Bondi, that people want to have an opinion and want to share that opinion with you. And you have some stories about that.
Well, that's the North Bondi Surf Life Saving Club. So both Neil and I live in the area, and I think it was a first for both of us where absolutely everybody knew that we were doing it and that they would basically offer their opinions of the building in any context.
Probably asking before if they are or not without asking, probably. Just say.
Well, it was, I don't think it's our best building, actually. I think it was really it was a difficult, a difficult proportion. It's kind of wide and flat. And it's very, in terms of the program, it's very striated in terms of levels. So it was a funny design process. Like with our own office, we had 3 models. The little one, the next size, and the next size, pretty much. With Bondi, I think, I'm not exaggerating, I think there's probably 50 or 60 models of it. And every time we'd get one elevation right, every other elevation would unravel. It's difficult to do a building in the round, which has very different natures on each side, and keep the building holistic.
Yeah, it's a very public building, as seen by many people.
Yeah, that was terrifying.
I understand. Are there any stories of people that, funny stories, what people have said about that? Actually, I have
feel like
something.
you're fishing. I mean,
No, I have something. Actually, you said from another project that someone said, "This is dead so ugly. You gotta be joking." Is that true?
So
The orange one.
I'm not sure if you're talking about the same thing, but very many years ago we won the Robin Boyd for our apartment on top of a warehouse building in Surrey Hills, and we went up to Cairns, I think it was, to get the award. And Neil was so embarrassed because the award came in a big box like this, so he made me carry it around. And somebody, I can't say their name, came up to us and said, "You don't deserve that award. Your building is ugly, ugly, ugly."
What? That's so mean.
Is that what you're talking about?
No, another one.
Oh, I've really spilled it now, haven't I?
But that leads to the same point. How do you deal with criticism? Of course, a difficult profession. We will want to do our best with every project, but it's challenging.
I think the reality is people are horrible beforehand, always, because people don't want change, and they are resistant to what you're doing, and they believe that anything is better than what you're going to do. That seems to be the way we're set up. Whereas we believe in the future, and we can see the building that's coming, and we're very optimistic about that building. But afterwards, people say nothing. There is no criticism. Maybe they bitch and moan in private about what you've done, but nobody tells you what they really think.
Which is a pity. It would be nice, right? They say, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
Love it.
It might be more useful to have a culture of genuine critique of buildings rather than a culture of resistance to any change, no matter what, and then no culture of criticism afterwards.
That's true. Something that you mentioned about the collaboration with Neil is that, it has been 30 years of collaboration, and that humor have helped a lot. What do you consider, not talking about the question, what do you consider the hardest part about of the profession?
You know, I think we're not in charge. I think Koolhaas said it beautifully once. He said, architecture is a mixture of omnipotence and impotence. And we are not in charge, and a project can die at any moment for things that you can never predict or understand. And I think the precariousness of that is quite wearying. I think that it's tough. It's tough on the people that we work with. It's tough to sort of live with that uncertainty.
And with that reminds me of projects that might not be built
Most
at the
projects
end.
don't happen.
How do you carry that? Because that's kind of a weight
I
in the
think
shoulders.
we've been very lucky. I think we've built a lot for the size of practice that we are, and I think we've focused on quality and commitment to what we build. We're never going to be churning out tons of buildings every year, and maybe that's a good thing.
How many buildings have been turned down? One or none?
Torn down, one and one in the wings.
So almost everything.
Almost everything's still standing, which that's pretty good after 30 years.
Camilla, I will say, well, let's continue in a minute the conversation for the roundtable discussion. But for now, Camilla, thank you for the beautiful talk. We have enjoyed that a lot. And see you in a minute. Thank you a lot.